One crazed killer who thought she had lost everything went on a rampage and shook the state of Virmond. But who was to blame for her actions that ultimately cost the lives of 4 innocent women? Today we take a look at the solved case of Jody Herring and the events that led up to one fateful day that devastated not one family, but 2 whole families. Who is Jody Herring? What drove her to do such a thing? And how could she have thought it was a good idea? Welcome to the northeastern state of Virmond, known for its lush forests, majestic mountains, and breathtaking hiking trails. In the small town of Barry, southeast of the state capital of Montpelier, lived a 40-year-old woman named Jody Herring. She was born in 1975 into a very large family. Her grandfather had 16 children, and of course most of them already had children of their own. Thus, Jody probably had many more cousins than she could count. In her naughties, Jody was described as a generally happy child. She was very close to her father and was naturally bright and energetic. However, as Jody grew up, several tragic and offensive events happened in her life. The first, and perhaps the most traumatic loss occurred at a very early age. She was about 5 years old when her father was found dead on the front lawn of their family home. He allegedly took his own life because a gun with his fingerprints on it was found near his hand. Jody was home when it happened, and her father's death shook the little girl. As time passed, the pain of the loss dulled. But Jody and family members were certain that their father had not settled the score of his life. Apparently, shortly before his death, his father had told his friends that he had been threatened several times. So he had been carrying a gun for months, and even when he went to bed, he hid it under his pillow, and that gun was found at the scene. Witnesses claimed that this gun had been placed in his hand. However, it was ultimately determined that Jody's father took his own life. After her father's tragic death, Jody began having frequent seizures, but her family never sought psychiatric help for this. To make matters worse, negligence on the part of the family towards the girl was evident throughout. These factors greatly affected the growing girl's emotions and behavior. Family members and others just silently observed and noted how Jody could sit and stare into space for hours without noticing anything around her. One of her aunts described it as if Jody was completely detached from the outside world. Another aunt also claimed that her niece always had a dead stare. Throughout her youth, Jody was abused by her mother and some members of the extended family. The neglect went so far that at the age of 11, Jody and her 14-year-old brother were kicked out of the family home by their own mother. And from that point on, the girl often slept in the back of the car. And during the very bad times with her grandparents, the girl continued to grow up in a very disturbing and unfavorable environment. At the age of 17, Jody was assaulted. The outcome of this terrible event was her first pregnancy and the birth of a child. And a few years later, the girl had 2 more children out of wedlock. Stepping into adulthood, Jody was in a situation of uncertainty and disadvantage. Even at the best of times, her daily schedule consisted of drinking alcohol and using illegal substances or ways to find them. This lifestyle was compounded by deteriorating mental health that still needed to be addressed. And even though Jody was a mother of 3, she was still homeless. The 4 of them moved between the homes of different family members, trying to stay off the streets. Jody was in trouble with the law and was known to the authorities for a number of very different reasons. Her problems with the police began in November 1998, when the girl was only 23 years old and was cited for driving while intoxicated. This led her to jail for several months. In June 2001, Jody was charged with counterfeit goods fraud, and just 5 months later, she was convicted after she was once again arrested for drunk driving. In May 2003, a new type of violation of Jody's law was spotted, meaning she was charged and convicted of possession of a controlled substance. In November 2015, the woman was found to have repeatedly violated her probation. Because of this lifestyle, social services took notice of Jody and became concerned about how and by whom her children were being cared for and taken care of. And unfortunately for Jody, but perhaps fortunately for her children, they were taken away one by the Department of Family Child Services. In the end, only 1 child remained in Jody's care. The other children were placed in the care of foster parents, and now Jody was desperate to keep the 3rd, youngest child with her. As it happened, however, Jody and her youngest daughter were homeless again, and the school counselor became aware of this. He offered to help the woman with the child, but in talking to Jody, he found out that she was extremely inconsistent in her reasoning and her actions were also lacking in logic. Whether this was due to her frequent abuse of illegal drugs or whether it was her deteriorating mental state is not known. But Jody resolutely refused help from the school, which, in the minds of those people who genuinely wanted to help her, reinforced the belief that Jody, for the sake of her only remaining child, was not willing to change her bad habits. In keeping with this perception, the school principal felt that Jody was not capable of caring for her daughter in her current mental state, and so the Children's Family Unit was called again. At this time, things were not going well for Jody. Anxiety and fear began to rise, as did the possibility that she was about to lose her last child. But unfortunately, her addiction was stronger than her anxiety. Despite becoming homeless, Jody continued to drink and use illicit drugs, and as expected, her mental health continued to deteriorate. Her carelessness and resistance to change led to Jody's last daughter being taken away from her for the safety of the child. When the woman learned that the school principal was the person who sent the signal to the Department of Children's Family Services, she became indescribably furious. According to those around her, Jody lost her temper. She lost her ability to think rationally and declared that she wanted to put a bullet in the head of every person responsible for taking her children away. She screamed that she wanted to watch and enjoy seeing their brain matter explode. Jody was bogged down in her own hatred. She wanted revenge and blamed everyone around her. She showed her current partner, Henry, a handwritten list of murders she had compiled. The list was headed by two of her cousins, Rhonda and Regina, and it was obvious that Jody was slowly developing a premeditated plan of violence. She tried twice to buy guns, but not surprisingly, after a background check, she'd been turned down both times. And while all of these actions by Jody were not obvious to those around her, the extent of the woman's emotional and mental state, which began to deteriorate, became more apparent in May 2015 when Jody called one of her cousins and threatened her. Both Rhonda and Regina found the call so unpleasant that they called emergency services to check what Jody was doing in the house she was temporarily staying in. The ambulance arrived at the address given by the sisters and found Jody lying on the bed, semi-conscious, surrounded by empty pill jars and a picture of her children. It appeared that Jody had tried to take her own life. After this incident, Jody was sent to involuntary mental health treatment. She was enrolled in a local nearby facility where she was scheduled for 90 days of treatment. Completing a course of therapy would have helped the woman get back on track and get the support she desperately needed. However, Jody created a scandal. She didn't want to give up and instead insisted on being released. Eventually, just a month later, without completing her treatment, Jody was released despite the fact that on examination the doctor strongly advised her to continue treatment. The doctor's recommendations were non-binding, and even the fact that he pointed out the patient's obvious instability did not help to keep Jody down, and she returned to the same environment she had been living in before. So the treatment facility's decision turned out to be a mistake for which they later had to pay a very high price. Let's fast forward 2 months to August 7th, 2015. The small town of Berlin, Vermont, with less than 3,000 residents. There, Tiffany Herring, daughter of Rhonda Herring and niece of Jody Herring, was living in a house there. The girl was about to visit her friend, and when she was about to leave the house, her attention was attracted by the answering machine, and Tiffany delayed to listen to the voice message. It was at that moment that she heard Jody's angry voice coming from the speakers. "Rhonda, Regina, you might want to stop calling the department or I'll come over and blow your brains out." Tiffany wasn't particularly alarmed, since to her this was just the usual classic behavior of Jody and her aunt, once again accusing everyone of turning against her. So the girl brushed off this voicemail and left the house to visit her friend. Just 2 hours later, Jody's brother, Dwayne, received 2 voicemails. He was busy, so he didn't get to the phone in time. But the 2 messages were about Jody, and in them she said, "If you think about your sister even once in a while, you will contact me now or as soon as possible. Watch the news, and you may regret not contacting me right away. Jody Herring left the house she was temporarily living in and drove to the place she hated the most, the Department of Children and Family Services. When she arrived, she turned off the car and sat alone in the parlor, waiting for something. People passing by saw Jody sitting in the car and yelling, but apparently to herself, as no sounds could be heard. Nevertheless, no one was interested in the woman's condition, nor did they ask what was wrong. They just hurried about their business. At the time, it was unclear why Jody was near the department. Maybe she was waiting for someone to come, but her children were far away in the care of other parents. Shortly after 5 o'clock that evening, a cheerful and brightly colored woman walked out of the front door of the building, and that woman's name was Laura Sobel. Born on the ocean coast of New York State, Laura was 48 years old. She had been hired by the state of Vermont to work for the Department of Children and Families. Laura was known as an extremely intelligent woman. In her time at the University of Vermont, where she attended the University of Vermont, where she earned a bachelor's degree in political science in 1989, then earned a master's degree in social work. And since 2002, she had worked for the Department of Children and Families and found her calling in helping those in need. Shortly after starting work at the department, Laura met a man named Timothy Farinius. They began dating, fell in love, and eventually decided to live together and produce 2 beautiful babies, Julia and Island. Laura was clearly a compassionate soul. She believed in helping those around her and clearly wanted to dedicate her life in supporting families less fortunate than her own. Working closely with those around her, Laura was eventually assigned to Jody's case. There was no calculation involved, and the assignment could have gone to any other social worker who had free time. But without any logic or reason, Jody Herring looked at it differently. In her eyes, it was Laura's fault that her daughter had been taken away from her, and unfortunately, that was why Jody was here in this parking lot waiting. On August 7th, 2015, Laura finished work the same time she always did. The work was hard, so the woman was relieved to be ready to go home and spend the rest of the day with her family. As Laura left the building, Jody got out of her car, and before closing the door, she pulled one large item out of the passenger compartment. It was a Remington bolt-action rifle. She walked up to Laura yelling, "Do you know what you did?" Laura didn't have time to run away. Jody raised the rifle sharply and shot the woman right in the face. As soon as Laura hit the ground, Jody shot her again at point-blank range, and the second bullet killed the unfortunate woman instantly. Jody then began to leap across the parking lot, waving her rifle around and screaming at the top of her voice. "I told them, they didn't listen to me. It was my 9-year-old daughter. They got what they deserved." It was clear from the outside that Jody knew what she had done and was quite aware of her actions. As soon as she placed the rifle on the sidewalk, she was knocked to the ground a couple of seconds later by 2 random passersby. Jody offered no resistance and calmly and patiently waited for the police to arrive. For her, her mission was complete. She had accomplished what she set out to do, and nothing else mattered to her. When the police arrived, it was noted that Jody was calm and laughing. And as she was lifted off the ground, an officer noticed a red mess on Jody's shoe and asked what it was. Jody smirked before shaking it off with her shoe and replied that it was nothing, a trifle. Shockingly, those bloody scraps were Laura's flesh and blood. Jody was immediately taken into custody. The events that unfolded after Jody's arrest revealed a far more tragic situation. The next morning, Jody's niece Tiffany, who was unaware of the situation, decided to visit the household of her mother Rhonda, Aunt Regina, and Grandma Julie. Tiffany hadn't heard from them in almost 24 hours, which was odd. Usually a day didn't go by without one of them calling. So Tiffany was pulling up to their house, located on Airport Road in Berlin, by 8 o'clock in the morning. When Tiffany and her friend arrived, they found the front door wide open. The girl stepped inside, and that's when everything went dark in front of her eyes. Tiffany found her mother first, and then her grandmother. They were both lying on the floor dead. There was blood under the bodies and on the walls. The woman had been hit with gunshots to the head. Running up the stairs to find her aunt, Tiffany wanted to catch her alive, But unfortunately, her aunt had also been killed. It seemed that Regina had resisted before dying from 2 shots to the torso. Police were called, and after examining and beginning an investigation, detectives realized that the bullets matched those from the Remington rifle that Jody had used the day before. Tiffany was desperate, but when she thought about who could have done this to her family, she only had one person on her mind: Jody. The charges against Jody were upgraded from 1 murder to 4 murders. The Herring family and the people of the state of Vermont were shaken to the core. Throughout the trial, detailed coverage of Jody's mental health was the focus, but after a thorough examination by psychiatrists, the woman was diagnosed with a severe anxiety disorder. This anxiety disorder may have been the reason why Jody felt she could never trust anyone with her life, hence why she repeatedly refused the help she was offered. But obviously, this could not protect her from the long arm of the law. Jody was found to be sane and able to attend court. During the trial, she was fine, sitting staring into space, showing very little emotion. It wasn't until addressing the families whose lives she had taken that she showed real emotion. "I've never been an angry person in my life, and I wish I could take that day back. I wish I could, but I can't." The jury will learn that the rifle Jody used to kill innocent people belonged to her partner, with whom the woman had been living recently, and she took the weapon without his knowledge. After a trial, Jody was eventually found guilty on all counts of second-degree murder for the murders of cousins Rhonda and Regina Herring and her Aunt Judy. Jody received 20 years for each life lost. She was also found guilty of first-degree murder in the shooting death of Sarah Sopel, and for that Jody was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. She later appealed to have her sentence changed, but the court ultimately overturned her request, believing that because she lacked the will to change, she could never be rehabilitated and would forever be a threat to herself and society. In conclusion, I will add that Jody will now be behind bars for the rest of her life. Perhaps some may sympathize with the woman who had her children taken from her, but her reaction was so cruel and harsh that she will now never see them again in her life. The conclusion of this case raised many questions. The questions were about social care workers, right down to preventing mental health offenses. For example, why was Jody allowed to leave the psychiatric ward so early if she was emotionally unstable? Would treatment have helped her if she had stayed? How exactly did Jody gain access to guns? And is enough being done to keep social workers safe from unsavory personalities? As a result of her actions, Jody has devastated not only the Sobel family, but her own family as well. Lara's children will live without their mother, but so will Tiffany. After Lara's death, the University of Vermont, where Lara earned her degrees, offered fully paid scholarships to her children to continue her legacy. And while progress has been slow, there's a constant call to action to make social workers safer. Thanks for watching. I recommend checking out other true crime stories as well. Click through right now. Also, don't forget the bell and subscribe to my channel.